You are listening to the 5 Acre Parables Podcast.
All right. Hello and welcome to the 5 Acre Parables Podcast. It's been a little while since we've recorded, but we are excited to get right back to it. I'm Daniel Meinson, and with me in the studio is my friend Andrew House. Say hello, Andrew House.
Hello there.
Tonight, we're just going to go ahead and jump right into our discussion for the evening. So, Andrew, if you would, go ahead, kick us off.
We are going to talk this evening about skills that we think it would be beneficial for homesteaders to acquire. Um, there's a difference between acquiring a skill for a purpose that's beneficial to a homestead and just having a hobby, right? You might have a hobby that you do that has no benefit whatsoever other than the enjoyment you have. These are all things we do that we enjoy, but it also benefits us on the homestead. And then we'll transition over to skills we should acquire spiritually to aid us in our walk with Christ as well.
Of course. Both of which are important, one of which has a more immediate application, and some of which or in the latter of which are obviously the more important and more long term ones to have. So thinking about this before, just to kind of save a little bit of time, honestly, and thinking about how we want to talk about this, we just want to start off by talking a little bit about these homesteading skills, how you would get these, and then as we talk about them, if there's any different specific methods that we know of, we'll share those with you. But generally, in my opinion, we've learned a lot of skills. We believe, Andrew, and you can back me up if you agree or not, but I think we both believe, first and foremost, in the power of YouTube. A
Yep.
lot of the things that we have learned are things that have kind of been lost in our area. People that we don't know, a lot of people that know some of these things. Now, I'm about to say the opposite here in a second, but YouTube has been one of the biggest motivators and best places that I've started to learn these skills from.
I don't know about if this is true for you like it is for me. We both have degrees, and I have learned a lot more from YouTube than I ever did at college that I actually use in my life to help me.
Mine's a Bible degree, so I don't know if I've learned more from Bible YouTube than a Bible college, but I definitely think, and you will see a lot of people even in skilled trades, if we're talking about physical skills like I want to say earthly skills, but I'm not saying worldly, if that makes sense to everybody. But in these earthly skills, I've seen a lot of people in these trades and stuff be like, if you just watch this stuff on YouTube, you don't even need to go to college half the time. And so, yeah, I know that to be true,
Mhm.
especially in that regard. Now, another thing, and I know that you believe in this one as well, and you've talked about this a little bit already on the podcast. I love, whenever possible, to find people in real life that actually know how to do these kind of things.
Yeah, it's really beneficial to have. I usually use the example of an older person that has done this for 50 years. They've made a lot of mistakes doing it. They can tell you what has worked for them and what won't, and why it didn't work or why it did work, and save you a lot of headache and a lot of trial and error over just trying to do something. And this is one of the problems with YouTube or any advice on the internet. Like, I think a lot about fruit trees. The advice you get from people in California or in Georgia is entirely different than what you and I need to hear. And
Yes.
so a lot of the general advice that is given on a lot of topics doesn't work if it's region specific. Some of the stuff we're going to talk about is region specific. Some of it would work anywhere in any climate, but
Yeah.
you have to kind of filter through the internet stuff to make sure it works for you. With an old timer that is in the area where you're at, it's automatically tailored to your region, which is helpful.
Yes. Yeah, it's super handy to be able to. And and this is gonna apply to both of these, and I think we'll come back to this when we talk about the spiritual. But even with the homesteading stuff, so many people through our church connections. I mean, obviously, the way that we got to know each other was through church,
Mhm.
and so the church has been an awesome place for us to meet people that know these homesteading skills and the spiritual skills, of course. But we'll get to that. The homestead skills. We met a lot of people. You know, we have about what 8 or 10 families right now at church that are all gardening at this point, and we're
Mhm.
all just like every Sunday, we put this in this weekend, or we put this in, or we're gonna go get this, or hey, we get text messages, hey, there was a sale here on these plants. You want me to pick you up one or something like that? And it's just
Yep.
been awesome to learn those skills even alongside those people. Even if they don't know more than you, they may figure something out while you're figuring something out, and then you can swap information.
Yep.
But I can think back on a lot of the older folks that I've learned from, some of whom are still here, some of whom are not, that have blessed my life with passing some of these skills on.
Yeah. We're not that old yet. My knees feel old, but the older people I know tell me that I'm not old yet. But it just looking back over like when I first started growing plants and stuff on the homesteading side, like if I could have known what I know now back then, it would have been so nice. And so just tack on
Yeah.
another 30 or 40 years experience to that. It's it's priceless to have somebody with that amount of wisdom share what they have learned over that amount of time with you. Really
Yes.
one of the most beneficial things, beneficial ways to learn.
The other thing about learning skills that I would say is there just comes a point where you got to get in and try.
Yep.
We're going to be one of the skills that Andrew is going to talk about a little bit tonight is welding. And that's something here recently. Actually, I've had a welder sitting in my shop for 9 years that I got from Harbor Freight. It's not the greatest one, but it gets the job done. And I've been scared of it for 8 of those 9 years. And I've just decided I'm going to start sticking pieces of metal together, and
Yep.
I've already tonight working on this and trying to figure it out. I make a lot of welding splatter and just going through the process like, hey, what do I need to learn? Because maybe there's something that you could sit there and read a whole book about it, but then you start to actually do it and realize, hey, here's something specific that I need to know how to do. And so
Yep.
doing it will help guide your learning process, whether it's through YouTube or people, whatever.
Yep. The only other thing I would add onto our list of learning stuff is forums. On some of
Okay.
this stuff, there are forums available on the internet with a good group of people that will be more than willing to tell you what has worked for them, what hasn't worked, give you advice if you run into a problem. And so there are places out there where you can get advice from people of a like mind on the homesteading side. I wouldn't encourage you to go to theology forums on the spiritual side
No,
and seek out the best
no,
answers
not
there
necessarily.
because who knows what you're going to get there. But
Yep.
for the homesteading stuff, forums can be beneficial.
Yes. My mother will get me in trouble if I don't say books, although I do
Mm.
believe that as well. I've
Yeah,
started to build up a very extensive homesteading specific library. Sometimes you don't have the internet. I know it feels like you're always going to have the internet, but sometimes you may not have the internet, and sometimes you may not have anybody to call, and nothing really beats a good book sometimes.
yeah, I agree.
So, in thinking of skills, we are going to try to avoid talking about things that we've already talked about, right? Starting seeds was one of our last podcasts that we released, one of the last few. That's obviously a skill we all need to learn, but we've already talked about it, right?
Yep.
So we're going to stay away from a lot of general gardening stuff. That's one of the things. A lot of livestock specific stuff. I think that's another one of the things. that we're going to try to stay away from a little bit. I know Andrew has one thing he wants to add with gardening, but uh, a lot of those type of things we're going to stay away from those. We're just going to try to talk about some general skills that we think will be helpful for homesteaders. Andrew, you want to start us off?
Sure. So the first skill I think we should acquire is design, learning how to design different systems. And this is a really broad one that can be applied to everything from a garden to a fence to your chicken coop or your chicken run. I make all of my plans in my head first and then put them on paper before I go to building something with a few exceptions. It doesn't matter how good you are at driving posts or putting plants in the ground or anything like that. If you design a bad system, it's never going to be good, no matter how well you execute putting that system in place. And so if you design a bad chicken coop, your chicken coop's going to be bad no matter how well you build it. If you design a bad garden, you're going to run into issues no matter how good you are at maintaining that garden. And so this is one that you really have to get some experience under your belt. You can learn from other people, but you're going to have to, over the course of time, design several things, realize your shortcomings in those designs, and then apply what you've learned into your future projects. I can always look back and see mistakes I've made or something I would have done better on how I design my chicken coops. How the door opens, for example, is slightly different on Chicken Fort Knox 2.0 versus
Mhm.
1.0.
Yep.
1.0, junk gets kicked down there by the chickens and gets in the door jamb between the door and the door jamb and makes it hard for the door to shut. So I have to clean it out every few days or the door doesn't want to shut. I fixed that on the second one. So, without rambling on about a lot of other things, you should pick up the skill of designing whatever systems or things you're trying to build and put in place.
Now, real quick, how did you say you designed your stuff? Do you put it on paper? Is that what you said?
It's in my brain, first
And
of
then
all,
goes to
and then I
paper?
end up putting what I have to on paper because sometimes I shuffle stuff around in my head and I think of something to improve, but I don't compensate for it in other areas. And so I'll end up messing something up if I don't have it written down.
I'm gonna throw out a few free design things or some easy design things that'll be helpful. 3D modeling programs sounds super overwhelming to figure out. Google SketchUp is a free one, and there's a ton of online support, and you can do a lot of basic stuff really easy with projects on there. If you want to get really deep into that, Fusion 360 is a arguably probably better one, but more complicated. But you can actually make mechanisms in Fusion 360 and make them work. Uh, and so things like door jams on chicken Fort Knox's, you can potentially uh, have the door, you can model the door on the hinges and get the actual motion going. If that's something that you want to do, or you feel like your brain works better that way, or, if you're in a period like we're coming up on summer when it's 98 degrees outside, I'm not going to want to
Mhm.
be outside designing things. If you take the time while it's 98 degrees outside and 100% humidity, um, you take that time to do some of that design on there, you can maximize your time when it's not 100 degrees outside. So,
Or on
depending
the opposite end of the spectrum, the darkest part of winter is when I get a lot of stuff
that too.
planned out.
I always have about a 3-week break in the middle of summer and in the middle of winter from doing stuff, and I try to catch up
Mhm.
on some video games and do design work. That's
Yeah,
pretty much what I use that time for. Uh, So the other thing is, I have seen this done before. If you are looking to design a project in the real world, you can go and clip your property off of Google Maps or other satellite imagery, and you can actually model that. You can bring that image into SketchUp and you can model it on the spot that you're going to build it on. So
that's really
sometimes
cool.
laying stuff out like that has helped me. That about it for design?
Yep.
All right. So my first one that I was surprised was not on Andrew's list is carpentry. I think basic carpentry skills are one of the most handy things that a homesteader can have. Um, and I will provide evidence of this by talking about the farm show. We went to the Four States Farm Show this weekend. It's in Pittsburgh, Kansas, where our church building is located. And you can go there and you can see all sorts of amazing pre built chicken coops. Andrew, would you like to guess how much a pre built chicken coop cost at the farm show?
More than my car, probably.
Probably both of our cars. $8,000, $9,000. I saw a premium one for 12 grand.
That sounds like it should pay for a chicken house, or a chicken factory
Yeah.
in my head.
So basic carpentry skills, you do not have to be able to do traditional 14th century medieval hand joinery to be able to get two things to stick together and hold together in a very secure manner. You can make your chicken coops for 1/10 of the cost easily, if not
Mhm.
cheaper, especially if you want to get into reclaimed materials too. You can make stuff even cheaper. And you can scale, you can do this as little as, I want to make some boxes to hold all my produce that I've gathered over the winter in my basement, or you can make it as complicated as I want to build my own chicken coop. Or if you really get into it, you want to scale it up, all the same things apply to building sheds, houses,
Mhm.
all of that kind of stuff. And so I personally think carpentry, basic carpentry skills, being able to take a tape measure, cut things, cut boards, and make them stick together is about the handiest thing a homesteader can know how to do.
It's a really great skill to have. A few things having good carpentry skills does for you is you are allowed to overbuild something. Whenever you're buying something, a lot of the time to keep costs down on their end, it's built cheaper and more
Hmm.
flimsy than it would be if you built it yourself. You're able to build it the way you want it, strong enough to last and out of good materials. If you are investing a lot of equity into something, you don't want to have it shoddily built and fall down on you in a couple of years. Put just plain pine boards down on the ground where they're going to rot within a few years. The other thing it really does is it opens a whole world of customization options that you're going to have a difficult time finding or you're going to pay a premium for. On my chicken coops, one of the things that I did do is I built an elevated coop in my run. It's 4 foot off the ground, and so that doubles the usable space while limiting materials that were used. And it allows me to open a door in the side of the coop and pick out eggs at chest level. And that is very convenient for me. So it opens up a lot of options for you to build stuff that you would have a hard time finding or would be very expensive.
We also said, you said overbuild, but I'll also say that you can underbuild stuff too. If you just need
Mhm.
something cheap or quick or easy, um, there is a world of jigs, and I'm not talking about the dance, but if you are trying to do a repetitive job over and over again, there are a lot of quick, easy ways, and I can't even, we can't even get started into this topic, but make a if you're trying to space something specifically, cut some boards, put them together, and then move your object the same amount every time, and that'll help you.
Mhm.
You can space your plants that way. So underbuilding things, if you just need something cheap to do a repetitive thing for one weekend, you can throw something together instead of having to go online and find the specific thing you want and then order it and wait for Amazon to come in 2 days
Yep.
if you're lucky. All right, you're next, sir. Talk about sticking metal together, I guess.
Welding. So I think you know how I can't remember what president it is used to say he wanted a chicken in every pot, you know, as a sign of wealth. I would like for every garage to have a tombstone stick welder or a MIG welder there, being able to weld, even if you're not a professional at it, it opens up a lot of options for repairs and for
Yeah,
building
repairs.
stuff.
Yep.
Whether it's brackets for an anvil to hold your anvil on the stump, or if it's something like shelf brackets or bed frames. I built bed frames for the beds I built for the kids. It opens up a lot of options to you. The next best thing to having a welder and being able to use it is having a really good friend that's close by or a neighbor that's good at welding.
Yes.
That's a cheaper option, but you have to go begging other people to be able to do stuff for you. And so, like, if you have, I don't know how many times I've welded the bracket that holds the radiator on the motor of the sawmill. It has a lot of flex and a lot of force that shakes the radiator whenever the mill carriage is going back and forth. And whenever it breaks, we don't have to order a part from Wood Miser and wait for it to get here in the mail and pay for express shipping. I can just stick it together with my welder, grind it down, and we
Mhm.
slap it back on immediately. So welding is a good skill to have.
You also need to be good with a grinder.
Look, a grinder makes you look a lot better than you are when it comes to
Yep.
welding.
Yep.
I am not ashamed. I am not ashamed to grind my welds down and hide how sloppy they were.
Yep. So this next skill that I wanted to talk about is one that I specifically know Andrew is avoiding trying to get into. One of the things I think would be super handy for homesteaders, more homesteaders to get into is ham radio. Ham radio is, for people that may not know, it's a very specific set of bands that are marked off for citizens to use. You have to get a test and a license to do it, but it opens up a whole different world of communication. And not only if you are able to potentially get your family to all get together and get ham radios, or if you want to look into GMRS radios, you can get a family license for those. They are much better, much more stable, got a longer range than any off the shelf walkie talkie you can have. On top of that, many people may not realize that ham radio operators still to this day are one of the best sources of information on weather. So there are in your area, and I guarantee they're in your area, no matter where you're listening, there are repeaters that are oftentimes people use to relay information. It's basically a relay station. And here recently, with all the tornadoes that we've been having in our area, we can turn on my radio and tune it to the repeater and get accurate weather information from your area. More accurate sometimes than radar or anything else that you're getting on that. Radar can potentially spot tornadic activity, if I'm using that word correctly, but a lot of times people will use ham radio as a way of communication. Also, it's not necessarily tied to cell towers and it's not necessarily tied to a grid if that's important to you, like it is to me.
It's it's really cool. There's a there's a guy that's doing it. I know a couple of ridges over, a few like one road over, and it's cool. I'll never get into it, but I'll listen to you talk about it. So the next one is really general. We won't spend much time on this because we've talked about parts of it and other points, and we'll talk about other parts of it in the future probably. And this is just plant propagation. And there's three main ways of doing plant propagation. You can stick cuttings, you can graft, and you can start seeds. And I do all of those, and it saves me a lot of money. I saved, well, there's also root divisions. I should throw root divisions in there as well. Kathy at church allowed me to dig up and divide some of her peonies, and I saved 100 plus bucks on peonies this year, putting in peonies from her property. I've saved up over $1,000 for sure at this point, grafting my own trees, starting my own seeds. And so propagation in general, you can get specific into whatever areas you want to. with cuttings, grafting, or seed starting. But propagation in general is just a really good tool to have in your tool belt whenever you're expanding your homestead in different ways.
Simple enough. We have talked about that in other areas, but we have not let you just go completely nuts on grafting yet. We, those of you who know Andrew know that that's something that he's a complete nerd for, which is one of the reasons we love him. But
I could blather on for a while about it.
yeah, we're gonna give him a whole podcast episode on it at a later time. But yes, I agree. We had a lot more success starting seeds this year. Now, getting them outside was still a challenge, but we had a lot more
Mhm.
success with that this year. And if we were able to get all of the plants that we had inside outside, if we had been able to get all of those, we definitely would have saved a lot more money
Yep.
this year. Ideally, especially if you get really good at it, we talked about this, but I just want to mention it. Ideally, if you're looking at saving money, saving your seeds and then propagating them again the next year by planting them, potentially you can get your garden going for free.
Yep.
So the next thing that I wanted to say is I think a homesteader should get really good at using trucks and trailers or different combinations thereof. I cannot tell you how much money you will save even if you don't have a trailer at this moment. If you go and rent one, it is still significantly cheaper to haul your own materials home than it is to pay somebody else or the store to do it. And so
Yep.
hauling material, having trucks and trailers and the ability to confidently, so backing a trailer, that's a whole nother part of that as well. Having the ability to transport your own materials and potentially transport your own animals opens up a whole nother world of abilities to you. We have a stock trailer that we purchased from a man at our church. And when we had the cows out at our property, we had them brought to us just because it was a little bit easier. But when it came time, we loaded them up and we took them. We didn't load them up the first time. That's another story for another time. But we eventually got them loaded up and took them to the processor all on our own. And that's something that definitely would have cost a lot of money had we had to make somebody else do it. So getting familiar with how to use trucks and trailers. I will say you don't have to have a truck as long as you have an SUV or some other compatible esque vehicle that can pull. Trailers are where it's at. You can get a lot more options and a lot more customization. And I even have a truck bed trailer that is the back half of a truck that's been cut
Mhm.
off and then they welded a trailer tongue onto it. And so I don't have to have a truck because I can do all of the same things that I can do with a truck with that truck bed trailer. And so if you just have a big SUV, you have a Suburban or something like that, you don't have to have a truck necessarily, but trailers, being confident in pulling trailers, attaching trailers, hooking them up, making sure you feel safe, safety chains, the lights, all that stuff, that'll open up a whole nother world to you for sure.
Yeah. It opens up a lot of options. And it's one of those things that kind of doubles up. It can be a tax write off. And also, um, some people are able to make money
Yes.
hauling stuff for other people. Like
I don't
instead of
know that.
you paying someone to haul the cows to the processor, all of a sudden, Mr. Daniel has the option to haul other people's cows to the processor if they need him to.
Mhm.
So
Do you have any more, Andrew?
I have three more
All right.
if you're ready for them.
Let's.
Number four, you probably saw this coming, is how to run a chainsaw.
That was actually my next one. I was wondering if you were going to say it.
I'll let you keep it then. I'll go on to the next one.
No, let's stop. Let's stop
You
here
want
for
to
a
do
second.
chainsaws?
Chainsaw. Yes. So I'm actually going to talk about it for a second first, which is funny because Andrew is the one who's the expert at a chainsaw. He runs them for a living. So why is Daniel talking about it? Well, because I'm the idiot that had to learn how to do it from scratch and didn't just immediately inherit the amazing ability to run a chainsaw. Having somebody that can show you how to do it like Andrew, is really helpful. But having it, you can ask him for help all you want, but he's only one person. He can't cut down all the trees for all the people all the time. You will have so much fun running chainsaws. You can cut your own firewood. If you have a fireplace, you can save so much money. So much money if you just cut your own firewood. I cannot tell you how much money you can save that is not dependent on a propane truck, not dependent on natural gas lines, not dependent on electricity, not dependent on the grid. Everybody in the neighborhood can have their power out, and we can have a house running at like 85 degrees in the middle of the dead of winter because we cut and split our and process our own firewood because I know how to use a chainsaw. And
Yep.
so Andrew is obviously the expert on that, but coming from the idiot that learned how to use a chainsaw, be careful, be careful, be careful. I'm also in my short career as a volunteer firefighter, some of the medical calls I've worked have to do with chainsaw injuries, so please be careful. But it is a very useful skill that can be done safely, and you can save yourself buku amounts of money doing it.
Have you read Joel Salatin's Folks This Ain't Normal?
No.
If you still have some of the library apps from over here, you might be able to get it for free. It took me a long time to get it on a wait list, but I finally got it. And he pointed something out that I not noticed about chainsaws. Whenever chainsaws came out in like the 50s is when they really got available.
Everybody
All of a
started losing their
sudden,
fingers.
farmers and then homesteaders had the ability to harvest carbon at an unprecedented rate.
Yep.
Because before you had to go out with an axe and chop down trees and use them for building material or firewood. But now with a chainsaw, all of a sudden you can cut down so much more than people of the past have been able to. So it
Yep.
enables us to harvest carbon in a million different ways that is useful, whether it's poles for building a shed or lumber for a chicken coop or firewood just for us to burn or sell. Chainsaws open up a whole world of useful things for us to be able to do, including over here. Everywhere I have grass or plant a tree used to be forest. And so a chainsaw has been used on every square foot of earth that is not covered in trees. A chainsaw did that.
Yep.
And so it's been really helpful for me. I run one for a living, but at the same time, I use one around the house just to do some of the stuff I want to accomplish on the homestead as well.
Yes.
You have to
Um,
respect one, you have to be safe with it, like you were saying, but some experience, people showing you what to do, and just using common sense will go a really long way on you being able to do that and be safe.
know a lot of people that there are a bunch of, you're not a cedar mill, but there are a bunch of cedar mills in our area or in the general
Mhm.
area of the Southwest Missouri. You can get up Saturday morning, take your truck and trailer in your chainsaw. You can go to a place that has a bunch of cedar, cut you a load of cedar, get it on the trailer, and make $400 in a day. I don't know if this price of cedar's gone down, but
You're gonna sweat for it, but you can do it.
yeah, yep.
We we actually, sidebar, are supplying cedar to a cabinet maker, or not a cabinet maker, a coffin maker.
Oh,
So
even
there's
better.
a guy our age that is building coffins and selling them to old folks to get buried in from cedar trees from around here that we cut. Following up on the heels of using a chainsaw is how to maintain small equipment. I am not that great at this, but being able to change a spark plug, change a fuel filter, clean an air breather, stuff like that is handy. I don't know how many people buy a chainsaw or a lawnmower and they never do anything to it. They just run it until they start having problems and then they go buy a new one. You're able to get more life out of your equipment and save yourself a lot of money by just doing little maintenance things here and there.
Your equipment will also actually work better and run faster and more efficiently if you do the regular maintenance on it. Your lawnmower will mow grass faster if it's got breathing, a well breathing engine with a new spark plug and a sharpened or new blade on it. You're going to save time.
Yep.
Sure, you can push through, but if you start to add up that time, you're going to save a few hours legitimately every summer by taking 30 minutes and doing some basic maintenance on your lawnmower. And that doesn't just apply for mowers. You're going to find in homesteading that there's a lot of things that have small engines that you can use. We already mentioned lawnmowers and chainsaws, but log splitters run on the same basic engine.
Mhm.
Water pumps, there's a lot of gas powered water pumps, generators, those kind of things all run on the same basic concept of small engines.
Yep.
And a lot of them, side note, this is not an endorsement, definitely not, but a lot of them run off of a Harbor Freight Predator engine. And so if you even get familiar with a Harbor Freight Predator engine or a basic Briggs and Stratton engine, you're going to save yourself a bunch of money and a bunch of time.
Yep.
I know guys who have a truck and trailer and they load up their lawnmower every spring and they take it to the store and they pay $150 to do what will cost you $15 in 5 minutes,
Yep.
maybe 30. I'll say 30.
So my last one is, and we could probably do a whole episode on this if we wanted, building fences. I don't know how many times in a homesteading group you'll see people that get goats or sheep or even cows sometimes, and they're like, they just keep getting out. Well, your fences are bad. And you know how much fun it is to chase down
Mhm.
cows whenever
Oh, I
they're
bet.
not in the fence where they're supposed to be. So being able to build from scratch and maintain fences is a skill that is worth learning, whether it's woven wire, barbed wire. I have um, split rails just mostly for decoration around our place, and it's all worth learning how to do well.
Yes, definitely agree with that. Uh, I'm just trying to throw out a few more just quickly here. Basic firearm and hunting skills. I'm not saying you have to be able to go out in the deer woods, hang from a tree stand with a bow you carved yourself and kill a deer, but basic ability to shoot a gun and to use it. Even if you're not planning on going out and hunting, sometimes the predators come to you. We've been having a lot of issues with predators in our chicken coop, and we learned how to set raccoon traps, and they catch them live, and then you have to dispatch them. So knowing how to do that and the ability how to do that is very helpful in a lot of different situations. And if you just are in one of those places where you have the potential to take some meat at a legal time, that's always helpful. Also for defense, that's a whole nother topic, but just basic firearm and hunting skills.
On the heels of that, you already mentioned it, but trapping is a good trick to learn too. Um, if you have like a raccoon coming into your chicken coop, you can stay up all night with a gun, or you can
Tried it.
put 2 or 3 traps out there that are there all night long while you're sleeping in bed and can catch the critter that's after you or after your stuff. So, um, for different reasons, different animals, it also doubles up as a free chicken food source. If you catch a possum or a coon, you can skin it and cook it and throw it back in the chicken pen, and they will just pick the meat plumb off the bones.
I am bummed you didn't tell me that 2 weeks ago when I had dead raccoons. I did not think of that. I did not think of that at all. Man, that would have been
Yep.
handy. Well,
Cook them outside. I will say that.
The last skill, and this is something we kind of talked about already, but it is a skill that you need to develop, and that is networking. Because let's face it, you don't have all these skills. I don't have all these skills. We have basics in many of them because we've been working at it, but also that's because we took the time to network and learn from other people. Networking is a skill, it takes time. If you are not talking to the people at your church and finding out if they know how to garden, then they're never going to be able to help you with your garden. If you're not talking to your neighbors and finding out that they know how to run chainsaws, they're never going to be able to help you learn how to run a chainsaw. Networking is a skill in and of itself. It takes time, it takes effort. You're going to have to listen to a lot of stories. You're going to have to spend time yakking, is what I affectionately call it, just shooting the breeze and hanging out. But you, without just running up to random people and saying, "Do you know how to use this? Do you know how to use this?" You have to build relationships and ending up. I don't want to sound like you're trying to take advantage of people because you need to be offering your skills to other people. But networking in and of itself is a skill because I know how to do a lot more chainsaw stuff than I did 5 years ago. But when I have a tree in a tough situation, I'm still calling Andrew. Andrew's definitely going to contact me in the next couple years to learn ham radio. I know that's coming.
One thing networking taught me about gardening is that I overcomplicate stuff like a lot. Whenever
Yep.
I'm in the garden, I'm worried about my mulch cover, my fungal network, about how much compost is in the soil, how much, how good are the micronutrient levels. And whenever I talk to most of the people I know that garden, they don't care about any of that stuff, and they do great, if not better than some of my stuff that I put out. And so I overcomplicate a lot of it, and networking reminds me of that. And it does go both ways. You're able to offer stuff to other people, advice or help that anyone might need, but it is so beneficial for you, especially when you're networking with Christians, which you already alluded
Yep.
to have those people there to help you out in a pinch. I have a list of at least 10 people I can call day or night and ask them for help on something, and they will drop anything that they're able to drop and help in any way they can. And that is really helpful.
Yes. Homesteading, we talked about it in one of our earliest episodes, but homesteading, it is a myth that you can be completely self sufficient.
Yep.
There's absolutely no way you can do it all on your own.
Yep.
And so learn as many skills as you can. Jack of all trades is kind of a phrase that's thrown around a lot that I kind of like and kind of don't at the same time. But there is some truth in if you have basic ability in all these areas, you can not only save yourself a lot of money, but you can assist people in some basic areas and then you can develop those. Find the ones you're good at, find the ones you enjoy at, focus in on those, and you could potentially, hey, my friend is a really my friend is really good at working on small engines. I'm really good at carpentry. I'm going to help him build his chicken coop, and he's going to help me fix this lawnmower, or fix this tractor, or whatever it is. You know, can't do it all on your own. And then, so as we go into the Bible portion of this discussion of the skills here, I will remind us all, I think, of a verse that's pretty familiar to most of our audience about in Titus chapter 2 that talks about the older women specifically training the younger women, but it also is talking about older men there as well. And even though it doesn't specifically say it, I think the implication here is pretty obvious that the older men are supposed to be teaching the younger men as well, especially since Paul taught Titus, Timothy, and so many others the things that they needed to know. And so when we were talking about earlier about learning these skills, networking in the church is going to be able to help you develop. And I would say definitely, and this is going to apply to learning a lot of these other skills, you're not just going to be networking within your congregation, but within the church as a whole.
Yep.
Andrew and I do not attend the same congregation. A lot of the closest people that I know, or a lot of the people that have helped me, have been from other congregations. And so, but our gardening group that we have going right now is entirely within our congregation. So, you know, obviously look to the people around you, closest to you the most, but remember, it's good to sometimes go visit other places, make connections, go to gospel meetings, those kind of things. You're going to be learning skills from all sorts of people.
How to study. And that's going to sound silly, but I don't have a thing against daily Bible readings or daily Bible reading plans, but I do sometimes think people lean on them to just say they've been in their Bible, but they couldn't tell you what they read 2 days ago. There's a difference between reading and studying your Bible. And so figuring out how to productively study your Bible is important. And everybody's brain works just a little bit differently. You can figure out a system that is effective for you, figuring out the context, how to read through, how much you need to read, and where your limit is at on being productive. I'm actually doing pretty good on my New Year's resolution to read the Psalms. And I've realized if there is a long 50 or 60 verse psalm, I am not going to retain everything if I read the whole thing in one day like I will a 10 or a 20 verse psalm. With a 10 or a 20 verse psalm, I can think about it, I can have stuff that is retained in my mind, and I remember it a week or 2 weeks down the road whenever I'm thinking about it or trying to tell someone about it. And so you need to come up with a way that is productive for you to study. We have more options available to us today to productively study than anyone at any point in human history. And so it would be tragic for us to throw that to the wayside and just say, well, studying's really hard. I'm not like that guy over there that has a sharp brain, a steel trap of a mind. And so I won't do anything.
I have a lot I want to say and a lot I don't want to say. I got to be careful with how I say this. Obviously, I agree with everything you said. As somebody who went to a 4-year Bible program and has a Bible degree, you do not need to go to college to learn how to do this. However, in college, I did learn one of the best things I learned was how to study, how to use resources, how to access resources, how to find resources.
Mhm.
A few of the friends I made, the networking involved in there. A lot of this really comes down to, and this is actually what I'm working on for some short classes over the next couple Wednesday nights. This study of hermeneutics, which is how you're basically going to understand scripture or learn from scripture. I am currently reading a 450-page book about hermeneutics, which I don't even necessarily recommend you start with that or ever go to that necessarily. But one of the ways that you study is networking, going back to that, talking, discussing, learning. Um, you need to sit down by yourself with no distractions and try to study. But you can learn from people on the internet too. Podcasts, all this other stuff, those are all study aids, study tools that can be helpful. Like you said, there are more resources in history now than have pretty much ever been before and maybe ever will be again. But nothing beats sitting down, praying that you want to find the answer, and then cracking open the book and studying to show yourself approved to God.
One of the things that is the most productive for me to do while I'm studying the Bible is look for connections with other places in the Bible. It If you just isolate a passage or a book and you study it by itself and you don't ever pause to consider references made from that book and other places, or references that book makes to other places in the scriptures,
Yep.
or how Jesus is foreshadowed by Moses, or a million other things we could talk about, but the connections really help me to process stuff and understand how connected the Bible truly is. The more time I spend in the Old Testament, the more I understand how you cannot go more than a few verses in the New Testament without seeing something to do with the Old Testament, or some verse that's referenced, some passage of prophecy that is fulfilled. Look for the connections in the Bible, treat it as a unit, make that a part of your hermeneutic approach. Treat the Bible as a unit, not just as isolated passages, and see how it's interconnected. A beautiful woven tapestry of scriptures where you pull on a thread here, and it you see threads throughout the whole tapestry move. I don't know how beneficial that is, but I like to say that.
It Yeah, it's beautiful and it's amazing, and you're never going to find them all, but
Hmm.
I'm looking forward to getting to see them all in heaven. So, one of my first ones is probably going to be my most controversial take for the night, and I get more pushback on this than anything else as a minister. I believe a skill that every Christian, and I mean every Christian man or woman, should have is the ability to do public speaking. People want to make excuses. They want to talk about, oh, that's not something everybody can do. It is something everybody can do. It is something that not everybody chooses to do. That does not mean you're going to be the world's most emotional, amazing public speaker. You're going to bring us all to tears every time you get up there. You're going to be able to break down God's word in a way that nobody else ever thought of before. But everyone sharing, I'm going to sound this is going to sound liberal for a second, but everyone has a story to share, and everyone has experience with God, hopefully. Even if you're a Christian who's been a Christian for a day, you have a story as to how you got there that is beneficial for people to hear. And so, public speaking is something that all Christians are capable of. That does not mean you have to do it full time. That does not mean you have to do it for a living or for a job or anything like that. But there is coming a day we are facing in the church right now a shortage of preachers, and that shortage is being made worse by churches abusing the few preachers that are out there. Um, we are not creating as many preachers as are needed to continue to fill the pulpits. And you're going to find more and more situations where people need to be able to stand up and speak.
Yep.
And it's something that I feel really strongly about, that I feel like if you're really pushing back against it, uh, this is going to sound harsh. You're just too lazy to be trying. You're just too lazy. You're not trying at all. Now, again, you don't have to do it all the time. You don't have to do it every time. It's, every Christian has the ability to do it.
Whenever somebody I know is going to college and they ask for advice, not that I am the guy that they should get advice from at all,
Yeah.
but I always tell that person. Sometimes they don't even ask me, but I tell them anyway. Take public speaking in your first semester.
Yeah.
Like, they probably have a public speaking 101 or 110, whatever class, where you have to get up in front of people and deliver speeches. You learn the different styles of speeches, how to go about it. But what it does is it forces you to get more comfortable speaking in front of people, because a bunch of my classes, the professors, which this is a smaller, um, air quote, in the most loose sense, Christian college, every professor felt the need to make you give a public presentation, a class presentation. So you had to get comfortable getting in front of a couple dozen people, a lot of whom you don't really know, and talk about stuff. And so it's beneficial in a lot of areas of life. I actually used it when I worked at the hospital several times on whenever I ended up teaching a class or doing a presentation, trying to get us some new equipment or something like that. And so it's a skill that comes in handy, not just for spiritual reasons, but in several avenues of life, but especially in the spiritual.
And I absolutely believe at its core, public speaking is a skill, not a talent. I believe that there are people that have a talent for public speaking, but I actually, and everybody, people argue with me on this all they want, but they don't know my life and they don't know my story. I don't have a talent for public speaking. I don't have an inherent talent that just made me. I feel like a lot of times people use talents as excuses. Well, I don't have a talent for this. I don't have a talent for that. I don't think I had an inherent talent to be the world's best speaker, which I'm still nowhere near. I'm not saying I am, but I was forced to.
Yep.
I was forced to, all in school, homeschool. My mom has on the ye old VHS tapes uh, from our old video cameras. She has us doing little speeches and stuff on our little mini trampoline when me and my sister are like 6 and 4. I mean, they weren't anything great, but they were just taught. That was just part of the process. And so people, they act like, "Oh, Daniel, you're so talented. You're so talented at speaking." You don't know how many times I've had to speak.
Hmm.
You don't know how many times I've had to speak. I learned to do it by repetition, by being forced to do it in so many different ways. And now
I'm
everybody acts like I'm this super talented public speaker. No, I just learned how to do it. And you can too if you try.
I'm just pulling these numbers out of thin air here, but I would say like 80% of public speaking is just being comfortable doing it.
Yeah.
Like just not having a heart attack standing in front of people. That is the majority of what public speaking really boils down to. Because
Yep.
you and I can have a conversation, you could have a conversation with a half dozen people. If you put yourself behind a podium, if you're comfortable with it, you can have a conversation or deliver a speech to someone or a sermon or a Bible study or whatever because you're comfortable with it. Prep work obviously has to go into it, and there is a little bit of innate talent that comes into play a little bit. But I mean, the general principles of public speaking can be learned by anyone that's able to speak.
And I am not one that would suggest that famous people should be our heroes, but if you think about it, 99% of people who are famous because they are doing something in front of other people.
Yeah.
Musicians, actors, performers of any type, they're doing some sort of public speaking, public acting, public singing, public playing instruments, whatever it is. People that get the attention are doing things in front of other people.
Yep.
And if you're a Christian and you want to get attention not for yourself but for the story of what the Lord has done for you, being comfortable and able to share that in public
Yep.
through public speaking. Now, I think this leads into one of your next ones, right?
Yeah. So my next one is actually the opposite end of the spectrum. This is learning how to study with people in private because this is the opposite side. This is more of an evangelism than just public teaching point. If you can learn how to study with someone sitting across the kitchen table from them, you are going to be way more effective than arguing online or just inviting somebody to church. inviting someone to sit across from your kitchen table or you go into their home, share a meal, and then study the Bible together. It's an entirely different perspective and approach than just talking to 50 people in an auditorium. Because I don't know if you do this, but you're able to teach a whole class without looking at anybody if you want to. I try to make eye contact just to connect with people more, make sure that they're awake. But
Yeah.
you're able to just look at the back wall the whole time and never make eye contact. Some people have to do that, especially early on, to be comfortable because it makes them uncomfortable to make eye contact. Sitting across from someone and looking into their eyes while taking their questions or having a conversation and then trying to lead them through a study is different a different nerve-wracking experience than just speaking in front of people in general. It's much more intimate, much more close. And so I would encourage people to get comfortable with doing that. You can learn a system of how to do it, but it's going to boil down to just doing it at some point. You're going to have to sit across from somebody, work your way through a study, and you're eventually going to be able to look back and say, this was not that effective when I did that. I should have shut my mouth and listened whenever they were talking here. But it's a great skill to pick up and be able to have.
Now, I'll add a few things for it. First of all, I don't know when inviting people to the worship service became the only method of evangelism that most people know how to do. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I cannot think of any single time in the New Testament where Jesus or the apostles invited somebody to the worship service as an evangelism tool.
So the only place I've heard anyone reference to support inviting people to worship as evangelism is in First Corinthians, and I don't have the passage in my head. You'd have to look it up. But it references when Paul is talking about using spiritual gifts, the gift of tongues being used without an interpreter would be confusing to a visitor. And I'm paraphrasing here very heavily, but it would be confusing to a visitor, implying that there were non Christian visitors in their worship service. But I absolutely 100% agree that inviting people to church is not the same as spreading the gospel the way it was spread in the New Testament.
So it does say toward the end of the passage, it says in verse 22, thus tongues are a sign not for believers, but for unbelievers, while prophecy is a sign not for unbelievers, but for believers. Verse 23 says, therefore, if the whole church comes together and all speak in tongues, and outsiders or unbelievers enter, will they not say that you are out of your minds?
Yeah.
So there's a specific passage, okay? There's a specific passage about outsiders or unbelievers coming into the worship service. It can happen, should happen.
What that shows, though, is not that people were inviting them there as their evangelism and saying that was their part of sharing the gospel. It just shows there were non-believers in the worship service.
Yeah. Every time Jesus is evangelizing someone, he's either public speaking to them or sitting down one on one and talking to them.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Find me a passage where I'm wrong. It's either he's doing the Sermon on the Mount or he's sitting down with Zacchaeus. He's speaking to the 5,000 or he's having a one-on-one conversation at night with Nicodemus.
Or speaking to the woman at the well or Simon
Or-
the Pharisee in his house. Yeah.
Yeah,
Imagine how different it would have been if Philip was sent to the Ethiopian eunuch in the chariot ride going back home. And he goes, you should come to worship service with me
yeah,
sometime, uh, as
sometime.
loosely and generically as I can possibly invite you.
Yeah,
You know, evangelism is more than just inviting people to church. If you invite people to church, my daughters do that, and I'm so thankful they do.
it's awesome.
But at the
Yeah,
same time, that's not what pure evangelism looks like. It's a very childish, immature version of evangelism.
yeah.
If that wording isn't too strong, you can edit it out if it is.
No, I think it. I think it's a good place to start to build confidence and to build courage, but I don't want to see it's so hard for me to see people who are Christians for 30 plus years and that's the only thing they figured out how to do. That
Yeah.
makes me so sad. Now, caveat to all of this is done best with networking and having people
Mhm.
help you. You also don't see as often. You do see Jesus talking to people individually one on one, but you also see he specifically, when he sends out the 72 disciples, he sends them out in pairs. It's
Mhm.
like, well, Jesus, he could have covered a lot more. You could have covered a lot more ground if you sent him out individually, man. What are you thinking? If you have never done evangelism before, if you've never done public speaking before, have somebody help you.
Mhm.
Or even if you're super experienced at evangelism, have somebody there with you.
I can't prove it, but if you look at the example of Peter and John, it's commonly believed that Peter was the oldest and John was the youngest. You have youthful exuberance and experience, more experience at least,
Yeah.
in Peter and John being teamed together. It would make sense that they would duplicate that where they were able in the 70 going out as well. You have a younger guy with an older guy. That's
Yep.
a great way to get work done.
Yep. Let's talk about Paul and Timothy, Paul and Titus, Paul and Barnabas,
Yep.
Paul and John Mark, Paul and all the other people he mentions in his epistles. I also think husband and wives are about the best evangelism team you could ever come up with.
Yeah.
Uh, Aquila and Priscilla pulling Apollos aside and teaching him more accurately the way.
Hmm.
We aren't Jesus. And
Hmm.
so a lot of times two are better than one. A threefold cord is not easily broken, like it says in Ecclesiastes. Now, there are going to be times where you're going to have to stand alone or you're going to have to speak alone. That's just the nature of the beast. But if you're dictating the terms of the engagement and you have the opportunity to bring in allies, why wouldn't you?
I'll throw this out as an option too. We've encouraged people to be able to study on their own and then study with other people on their own, publicly and privately.
Yeah.
Pat Cowden had a system. I don't know if it's the one he's using now where he's at or if it was at a different place, but they set up teams essentially of people that are really good and comfortable at private studies, studying with people across the kitchen table, and people that weren't. Like they were working toward that goal, but they just weren't there yet to where they were competent and comfortable to be able to do that effectively. But what they could do is invite people to study with their friend who was comfortable, and then they would sit in on the study as well. And so instead of inviting people to church generically, just come visit us at worship sometime, they would say, would you like to do a Bible study with me and my friend? And the friend that was comfortable with it would be the one leading the study, but they were there learning, getting comfortable with it, and participating by inviting that person to study with another person. And so, even if you're not to the point of being comfortable studying with other people, you can be the catalyst that brings a person that is good at studying together with someone that needs to be studied with and working toward the goal of being that person yourself as you mature.
That's the biggest thing. I'm going to say this for the audience's sake. That's the biggest thing that drives me nuts about being a paid pulpit minister is it takes you a good 3 to 4 years or more to be able to find your footing in a new community on your own to try to find people to evangelize. If the members of the congregation would just introduce the pulpit minister to their friends and family, they could help you do more studies than anybody else. I mean, you could find your footing in 2 weeks,
Mhm.
but most of the time it's just like they don't, you don't think about those things or they don't talk about those things, and you don't ask for the help of that this person can offer you, and then it takes them forever. And a lot of congregations, and maybe this is a whole separate topic for another time, but a lot of congregations will be like, after 3 or 4 years, why isn't the preacher converting people? Well, he's
Yep.
still trying to meet the community. He's still trying to figure out how to get in the community, and that is getting harder and harder and harder because
Especially in a more digital world.
communities are more revolving around phones and schools that won't let people talk about Jesus.
Yep.
How are you supposed to, you're not supposed to talk about Jesus at the ball game, but that's the only place that the people are at, is at the local ball game.
Yep.
How are you supposed to meet people? How are you supposed to interact with people? You know,
Yeah.
that was one of my favorite things. I don't know if he listens much or not, but that was one of my favorite things about working with my friend Brian Cheney, is when he just knew everybody and would introduce me to everybody, and I could take it from there to some degree.
Yep.
And that just we had more conversations with people together, and he'll tell you that he learned more, and he can do it on his own way better now because of the time that we worked together. But I would never have met 1/10 of the people without him. And so it takes people working together
Yep.
to get good at these things.
The next one I have is, and this is a quick, easy one, how to write cards and notes of encouragement and stuff like that.
Yeah.
This is mostly for, you're a Christian, you're surrounded by Christians in your local congregation. It genuinely warms my heart whenever I get a note or a card that someone took the time to write telling me they appreciate me teaching a class, they appreciate me doing this or that, they just love me in general because I'm their brother in Christ. That kind of stuff really helps me out. It really picks me up whenever that happens. Years ago, my mom, I don't know if she got this idea from somewhere else or if she just came up with it on her own, but Barnabas is a son of encouragement. Like, he is known for encouraging other people in the New Testament. Mom started a project called the Barnabas Project, and it was just encouraging people, like going out of your way for a year to encourage other people. And that's really stuck in my mind. I benefit from it myself. So I've been trying to kind of do something similar unofficially, to write notes of encouragement to people. And I know at least some of the people that I've written stuff to have told me that they appreciate it and they've sent notes back my way.
Yeah.
And encouragement is one of those things that's kind of infectious, if that makes sense. Whenever
Mhm.
somebody writes a note to you, thanking you and encouraging you, it spurs you on to do the same thing for other people. And before you know it, there's a tornado of, we have what we call agape grams. They're just little colored pieces of paper that says agape gram, and you write a note to somebody and you stick it in there. We have little mailboxes in the back of the church in the foyer. You'll see pretty regularly several pieces of colored paper sticking in people's mailboxes because people are just telling each other that they love them and they're happy they're there. And so that's something you can do, even if you're not a wordsmith in the first degree and you're not that great at writing love notes to your fellow Christians.
Sure.
Like, it doesn't have to be fancy, it doesn't have to be long. It can just be something quick to pick them up and it'll help them.
Uh, I'll add to that we've been doing this year. We've been doing Sunday afternoon for the Savior, and basically all of the older ladies pooled all of their cards into one big box at the church building, and then we sit down and write cards, and it's been really fun. Um, that's not something I'm good at. That's not something I remember to do, but on that day, I try to sit down and write some of them. If you can't think of anything super funny or super encouraging to say, I this is what I was getting ready to say. I've just started sending silly things to people, like references to inside jokes, or just writing a joke in there or something. You would not. I mean, they crack people up, and that's that's encouraging. It doesn't have to be, this is the perfect verse to help you in this perfect time in your life. Just say something funny that you both have laughed about together, or say I liked your I like that shirt this Sunday, you should wear it again next Sunday or something. Just silly things like that. Doesn't have to be amazing just to
Yeah.
take the time to do that. It's been pretty entertaining. Me and two of the deacons and one of the elders are the men that stay to do it. There's not as many men as there are women who
Mhm.
stay to do it. But it's been pretty entertaining watching us try to stumble through writing cards. We're definitely not as good at it as the ladies are, but we're
Yeah.
trying, and that's what counts.
Something I forgot to say as well, like, a lot of people text somebody, call somebody, and that's beneficial too. Shooting somebody a text and letting them know how much you love them. But I think in today's really digital world, it's also really beneficial to have something you can hold in your hand.
Yes.
To get something that someone took the time to take a pen and a piece of paper and write it down and make sure it got into your hands physically for you to be able to read. It's a little bit extra special. Texts are cheaper than handwritten letters.
Yep.
The only other one I had, and I've kind of been on a kick of this because I've been teaching on it some lately, is learning how to fulfill your role in the church. And that gets some people wound up really tight whenever you say people have different roles. Harrison Butker, or whatever his name is for the Chiefs, is all over the news right now because he dared to talk about traditional men's and women's roles
Yep.
publicly. And so that gets people wound up. But knowing what you're supposed to do and what role you have to fulfill in the church is the first step to doing it well. I really hate being told to do a job where I don't know what my job actually is and how I'm supposed to go about doing it. So if you are a husband, if you're a wife, if you're a child, if you're a parent, learn what God has said about what your responsibilities are, and then you can set about actually fulfilling the role the way God intended for you to do it, if that makes sense.
All of these skills, both on the homesteading and the Bible side, require a willing heart. And so I would say we ask at this time for you to do what God would want you to do, to examine your heart and see if you're willing to take the plunge on what needs to be done.
You have been listening to the 5 Acre Parable